Welcome back. So in our previous lessons, we looked at a couple of things. We looked at our SOHCAHTOA acronym. We looked at how to identify which sides of the triangle are the opposite, the hypotenuse, and the adjacent. We also had a quick look at the ratios, the trigonometry ratios, and how the formulas get laid out. So we've got our sine trig, we've got our cosine trig, and our tangent trig. From here, we're going to get moving on into a couple of examples. So let's jump straight in. Now remember, as I said in a previous video, when you are doing trigonometry, if it helps you out, rewrite that acronym. So that's what I'm going to do straight up. First thing, SOHCAHTOA. And you'll find out in this video now why writing it down there, having it very visual, really helps us out. So let's start off with a quick example. Remember, as always, excusing artistic interpretation. We've got our right triangle, just a very rough right triangle. We're going to label this as our right angle, as we do. And for the purpose of this, we're going to actually use an angle of 40 degrees right in there. And remember, that sine of theta that we learned up the top, that just represents our angle, our unknown angle. In this case, theta is equal to 40 degrees. So we're going to use that in our formula. Now, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to start to label some of the sides to be able to determine what we want to find out. So now we're at a point where we can start to find out the value of our unknown side. But before we can do that, we have to name each side in relation to our angle. So we're going to use the same technique we spoke about up the top in a previous video, and we're going to put that dot in the middle and draw that line from the angle through the middle. Okay, that line, so x equals first of all, we have the opposite side labeled. It doesn't matter if it's an unknown label or if it's actually a given value. We just need to know that it's labeled. Now that we know that the opposite side is labeled, we also want to go ahead. Now we want to go up to our acronym, our SOHCAHTOA acronym, and basically just underline any of these triples that have the letter O in it for opposite. So we've got sine and tangent. They both use the opposite. Now we're going to do the same technique again from our right angle through the middle, crossing out. That's our hypotenuse. Yes, our hypotenuse is labeled. So we're going to do the same thing. Up in our acronym, sine uses hypotenuse as well, and cosine also uses hypotenuse. Now that we have two sides, we need to decide which one of these trigonometry functions has both sides included. And if we look at our tan function here, we see that tangent is opposite and adjacent. Well, no, we didn't have adjacent. Again, cosine is adjacent and hypotenuse. Again, we didn't have adjacent, so we know it's not that. But we see at the start, sine has both opposite and hypotenuse involved in finding that. So that's the one we're going to use. We're going to use our sine function. Now to do this, we're going to think back to our sine function up here. So we're actually looking at this part here, and we're going to see that sine theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. That is our formula. So we're going to write that down. Sine theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. And remember from a previous video, if this doesn't make sense to you, only for now, just at the start, you can write it opposite divided by hypotenuse. We want to try and move beyond this as quick as we can, but for now, for the purpose of this, that should still work. So let's get a bit more space. All right, so our next line, now that we have these values, we have our opposite, we have our hypotenuse, we have our theta, which is our value of degrees, we can start to replace those things in our formula with our given value. So sine, we know that it is 40 degrees, is equal to the opposite, which is our unknown. That's what we want to find out, over our hypotenuse being 15. Okay, or x divided by 15. Now, this is where we start to cancel things out. So we need to get x, our unknown value, on its own. So we just use the opposite operation. Now, to the opposite to divide, we know if we're not dividing, we're multiplying. So times 15. Now, here's the tricky thing. Yes, this is going to cancel out this 15, okay? But what we have to understand is this equal sign is like a scale. It's like those balancing scales. It's that balancing act. And if you have, in maths, it's all about making it even on both sides. If we have it even, yes, we're good. But if all of a sudden you have one side that has a huge amount more on your scales, it's going to tip strange. We don't want that. So what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So we're going to multiply this by 15 as well. And when we rewrite this line, it actually reads more like sine 40 times 15 will equal x. Now that's something we can find out. We have all of our values on this side here. This is good. This is what we want. And when we put it into our calculator, it's going to give us sine open brackets to start with. And then we put in 40. Then we have to put in our close brackets times 15. Okay, that's how it's going to look in your calculator. So that's how you're going to put it in. And when we put that in and we press enter, it gives us our final result being 9.64. And then it's like 1/8 so-and-so. But for the purpose of this, we're just going to go to 2 decimal places. But that is essentially the same process, no matter whether you're using sine, cosine, or tangent. Your first step is identify which sides you're using. Okay, you might be using the adjacent and the hypotenuse. You might be using the opposite and the adjacent. You might, like here, we were doing here, use the opposite and the hypotenuse. Remember, the adjacent and the hypotenuse always change depending on where the angle given is. That's what you have to really consider, how you're getting your opposite and your adjacent. Once you've got those named, come up here to your acronym and decide which one you're going to use. The one you are going to use is the one that has both of them in it. Okay? And then lay it out. Formula. Replace your formula and then start cancelling. That'll give you your answer. I hope this has helped. If you have any questions, please write them down, bring them in class, and we'll do everything we can to answer all your questions. We're going to get a lot of practice with this. So if you're not quite getting it at the moment, we will do some other practice with sine, cosine, and tangent as well. Okay.